meeting of the Common Council's Planning, Economic Development, and Land Use Committee. We have two items on our agenda tonight. We have a discussion of Councilmember O'Brien's resolution 627120R, and also the second meeting on the discussion of Councilmember Frederick's ordinance 96120. We're going to start with Councilmember O'Brien's resolution, and we will have public comment, but it will be towards the end of that discussion. So I guess we need to wait for Mike. I don't see Mike here. So council members present, committee members present, Alfredo Ballerin, Tom Hoey, myself, Kathy Fahey, other council members, Sonia Frederick, and Ginny Farrell. We have staff, J.R. Pichardo, Danielle Gillespie, Michelle Andre, and we have our planning staff, Director Brad Glass, Council Amy Levine, and who am I missing from staff? And then we have some other folks who I'll introduce as we go along. So we're going to wait a minute because we need the sponsor of the legislation. I guess we should have waited till we had him, JR.
I thought I saw him in the queue, that's why.
Okay.
He just texted me back. He's coming. He's on his way.
All right, great. Thank you.
JR, what's your background? Is that artificial or?
Virtual background, that's all.
It's the Hamilton stage, right?
Yep.
Aha.
Oh, did anybody subscribe to the Disney channel just to see the Hamilton online?
I subscribed to it the minute it came out.
Really? Wow.
I'm a Disney fanatic.
Oh.
Did you sing along?
Yes, I did, because I've been listening to Hamilton since the mixtape came out in 2015.
Since the what?
In 2015, the Hamilton mixtape came out that Lin-Manuel produced when he was developing it.
Kathy saw one of the first things. Like I had never heard of it before, and Kathy was going down to New York City, and she was like, "There's this crazy thing about."
Oh, I can't believe you remember that. Yeah, I actually saw the musical very early.
It was like nobody was talking about it, and Kathy, I was like, "Well, that's ridiculous." And she came back. She was like, "It was so good." I'm like, "All right."
Yeah.
And then it became a phenomenon.
Yes.
Guy I worked with was down
Oh,
there.
there's
And
Mike.
President Obama showed up. It was interesting for that.
What's that, Tom?
The guy I worked with was went for the show, and President Obama was there that night. So they, it was kind of everybody loved it. So.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Okay, so Mike's here. Hello, Mike.
Hi.
We've already gotten started, actually. I didn't realize you weren't here yet. And we are going to start with your resolution first regarding the potential brownfield sites. So,
okay.
So if you would, give us some information about why you brought this resolution forth.
Okay. I sent a note out to everybody on July 4th, and then I resent it out today. And I can sum it up, but it's basically, I've sort of been following this plot of land for quite a while. This was the same piece of land that the Albany School District was going to build a school on. And that's when the whole issue of its previous history as a junkyard, and a piece of it was owned by Armory Garage. And there was contamination, and eventually the school abandoned its plan to go forward with building a school there. Brighter Choice looked at the non-city owned parcel and also abandoned their plans of going forward. And then I remember that in 2006, Bill Bruce was the DGS commissioner, and he came to the council with a proposal to apply for a study grant through DEC to consider what they might do with the city-owned portion of 60 Calvin Avenue. And they hired Clough Harbor, who returned that study, I believe, in 2008. And they were just looking at the city-owned portion because that's all they were tasked to study. But they did find areas of buried heavy metals that they were concerned about. And I put the whole quote from that application process in the summary that I sent out on July 4th and again today. And Clough Harbor then recommended that the city, through DEC, apply for a grant to remediate the land and landscape it into a park, the part that the city owned. I then suggested that the city buy 60 Calvin Avenue, the non-city owned portion of it, and also consider making that part of Westland Hills Park. My idea was unheeded. And then for some strange reason in 2008, the city took the whole Clough Harbor recommendations and just put them on a shelf and forgot about them. So the land sat as it had for years and years. I go into a little bit about the history. Originally, before my time and before my memory, there was a picnic area up there on the old city maps called Schaefer's Pond. And that land was adjacent to where Armory Garage ultimately built. Armory Garage took over Schaefer Pond land, which I think they were one of the original owners then of 60 Calvin. 60B was owned by a coil wrecking company, and that has the the Clough Harbor recommendation for remediation due to the lead. And then when Anthony DeThomas came by with a plan to develop this, his plan didn't even mention that the 2030 plan refers to it as Site E, as a one of 7 sites in the whole city as potential brownfield cleanup area. So at the last meeting, the June meeting of the planning board, when this case was first heard, I made note of that and made note of the characterization that the appendix of the 2030 plan says that it's remained undeveloped due to concerns over environmental contamination. And it seemed to me, well, certainly I know Dan Hirschberg didn't seem to be aware of that because he disputed it, but it's in the appendix. I'm not a soil scientist, and but it does strike me as the 2030 plan was not a capricious plan. It was done with a lot of study and a lot of consideration, and they went back and looked at the old documents, and I assume that was what it used in determining that it's one of 7 sites in the city as potential brownfield. And yet it seems clear to me from what went on at the last planning board meeting and what went on at the workshop just this past week is that the intention of the planning board is to forge ahead and just make its own determination as to the suitability of this land for whatever the developer wants to put on it. I don't think that's the process that was intended in the 2030 master plan. I don't think it was intended that, oh, and then one other point which kind of struck me as a little surprising was in response to some comments that I made at the June meeting, Brad sent me an email, and I quote it. He says, reference to a site location as a brownfield or as a case of the comprehensive plan, a potential brownfield is not a de facto evidence of contaminants in the site. The designations are sometimes based on perception alone, if that perception is encumbering of a higher and better use of the site. Well, it seems to me that we shouldn't just say that the drafters of the 2030 plan were misperceiving the true nature of Site E it would seem to me that if a developer or a planning official thinks that the categorization of it as a potential brownfield site is an error, then rather than just having the planning board rely on a developer's analysis, I think they should go back and review it in the same manner that the 2030 plan was reviewed. And that's the whole point of my resolution. And I'm not here as a soil expert to say what's a safe level, but clearly some of the documentations emphasize that it was not a safe level, and that it would be duly constituted as a brownfield cleanup site. So the whole thing, it just seems to me not to make sense that the planning board would think that it could just rely on a developer and a developer's advocates to say that no, the 2030 plan had a perceptual error there and we don't have to heed it. So my resolution basically says send it back and have it reviewed in the same manner in which the 2030 plan was reviewed and conceived. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable request to make.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And so now I'd like to turn to the planning department to present your opinion on this. Brad or Amy, I don't know who's gonna.
No, I can speak. You know, I just pointed out, you know, that the brownfield, the statement that I made to Mike is consistent with the federal EPA and the state DEC with respect to brownfields. Typically, it's based upon, and when we did the 2030 plan, that's what it was based upon. Is you know, in some cases, we know based upon prior testing that had occurred that there is contamination at a site. In some cases, we see in a historical directory book that there was a gas station or another noxious use there that may have produced contaminants. We didn't do any testing as a part of that plan. Typically, when these sites do come up for development, and the plan is pretty specific, and I think the Brownfield program is pretty specific, is that the intent is to get the sites to a higher and better use. We want to eliminate that brownfield either perception or reality in the effort of doing that. And there were 7 areas specifically called out in the plan, and there were about, I think, 400 other sites that had potentially uses that were could be brownfields or perceived as brownfields based upon their prior use. Some of my concern is that some of those other 7 sites that were called out are entire neighborhood areas. Like, so for instance, study area B was Sheridan Hollow. Study area A was the North Warehouse District. So I do have a little bit of concern of whether this ordinance is applying to this specific site or if it applies generically to all of those, and they would have to go back to amend the comprehensive plan in the light of any development there. Where I do agree is that given the indication in the plan, there should be an analysis of the soils for contamination there. At the 60B site, which is adjacent to this, there was in fact lead found on that site. And Mike is correct that as far as we've been able to ascertain, that site hasn't been cleaned up yet. As far as this site, you know, we asked the developer to hire a professional to do test pits and a study. And that's typically how this is done. I think Mike would have preferred that the city go out and hire our own professional to do that as opposed to the one that the development team hired. We don't really have a process set up to do that right now. And I think, you know, when someone's putting their PE stamp on something, you know, just as we accept a traffic report or another type of study, I mean, if they're qualified in that area, and I did suggest to Mike that we would review the information contained within the study to make sure that it was adequate in terms of the test pit locations and the depth that they went to. And I think that that's something that we're intending to do. That's really all I have to say. I mean, I definitely understand and sympathize with Mike's concerns. I just think I have some concerns again about the way the resolution is drafted and the impacts it could have elsewhere in the city, as well as the fact that, you know, it almost seems, despite the fact that the comprehensive plan says that clearly it's a potential, these are potential brownfield sites. It does not say they are de facto brownfields, and I stand by that statement.
Okay, and Brad, just to follow up on one of the things that you mentioned, as far as that's not your normal procedure, have you ever done any kind of separate hiring somebody, a third party, to verify a study that you're aware of?
Very, very rarely. We don't have really funding set aside for that. There is a process. In some cases, other towns or cities have what are called town designated or city designated engineers
I see.
that they contract with to do some of this work in assistance. We happen to have staff that are qualified. In most cases, there are certain exceptions, such as soil studies, where we don't have areas of expertise. There's also, situations where you could set up an escrow account to have the developer pay into that and then have the city do the study. I just don't, I think it would be improper in this case, having told them to go out and hire a professional and have them go out and hire a professional to do the work we asked them to do, to then say they have to go out and hire another party to, third party to review that. And like I said, I don't know that we have the funding apart from that to be able to do that.
Okay. Mr. Grant is here. What, Mike?
Well, can I just respond to what Brad said? The funding issue, I'm not aware that the city would necessarily be the one funding it. And I think in the other cases when they asked for an alternate opinion, the developer wound up funding it. And the other point, which strikes me as strikingly strange, was the application. I mean, if it were, I'm assuming a professional engineer is going to go in and look up the history, but this one didn't even mention the fact that it's cited as a potential brownfield, and that actually the site, a portion of that site, got DEC funding for further study. It qualified for a whole program that DEC had for study and apparently for remediation. So it seems to me that that's a glaring red flag for just simply going ahead and proceeding forward based on whatever the developer's professional engineer is saying. And then Dan Hirschberg was actually, professed to be, when I quoted in my public comment at the last meeting, the comments in Appendix A, without even realizing I was quoting from Appendix A of the master plan, Dan retorted, well, that isn't true. So it seems to me that there was a glaring omission on the part of the papers that were submitted for consideration. And as to the impact of does this have on the warehouse district or on Sheridan Hollow, well, I'm only focusing on 60 Colvin because that's the only area that I'm familiar with enough. But I wouldn't think, if a developer comes up and at least puts in his application that it's a brownfield and starts discussing brownfield considerations, but this didn't happen in this case. And I think that's a glaring red flag that maybe something was inadequate in the whole process, in this whole application process. So I think we need to be protected by the 2030 plan when it seems to be disregarded and when it seems to be people's health is at risk.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm gonna, Joe Granich from the developer is here. And Joe, if you could kind of very briefly discuss this report that was done by the engineer, so that people can better understand the process that you went through to make a determination about whether or not this was brownfield or not.
Can you guys hear me? First of all, that's my biggest concern. Can you hear me?
And can you tell us what position you're serving as with this developer?
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm sorry, because I had a problem before. Well, Ms. Faye, let me ask you a question. We had asked for some maps to be provided to the members of the committee. Do you know if everybody's in possession of the documents that we have sent so you could look on or review them while we talk?
They have been provided with those maps.
Okay. So, Ms. Faye, with specifically to your question, I'm going to defer to my partner. And I'm sorry, you asked me what my role was? I'm sorry.
Yes, I wasn't sure what your role is here.
I am, well, if I can, by way of background, I just want to give you a little bit of background. We tried to speak at the common council meeting. We had a technical problem, and I was hoping to address the entire council. Obviously, we're going to address the committee this evening in the hopes that our message will be conveyed to them. Tony D. Thomas is here with me. He is my partner on 60 Colvin Avenue, this project that specifically we're referring to. As well, we have two other individuals, Tony's brother and another gentleman that's a partner of ours. But I just want to put some things in context. I think it's important for you to understand, and then I'll allow Tony to address the more scientific aspects of Mike's resolution. I own 21 Colvin Avenue and 19 Colvin Avenue myself. My law firm is on 21. I purchased 19 not that long ago. I renovated both properties, and they are fully rented. We, as a group, own 28, 40, 50 Colvin Avenue, all recently completely renovated and completely rented. The proposed site is 60. This is the vacant land that Mike is referring to. We have invested a lot of time and money into this neighborhood for reasons that we believe it is probably one of the best, if not the best, walkable neighborhood in the city of Albany. And our plan and our proposal, I think, supports not only that, but the money and the investment and the time we put into this. I would like an opportunity to speak more to the members of the committee, but to answer your question, Ms. Fahey, with respect to the science and the testing that was done, and I believe Mr. O'Brien's, I understand where his heart is, but I think he's misrepresenting or misinterpreting the facts here. Clearly, there's contamination at the 60B site. I believe what's happening here is that they're trying to bootstrap contamination at one site to my site because at one point in time in the past, there was a proposal that involved both sites. And because the proposal was abandoned and never went any further, the bootstrapping of contamination on one has now affected mine, or at least the perception is trying to be put forth that contamination on 60B must include 60A. My partner, Tony, I'd like to allow him to talk to you about the actual testing that was done. I believe that the argument by Mike that we never addressed this in our plan is disingenuous at best, by the simple fact that the test borings that were done, the maps that we have provided to both the members of the council, the committee, and the planning department clearly show that there was significant testing done and there is no soil contamination on our site that rises to any level. More importantly, as Brad pointed out, a brownfield designation by its very nature does not mean that there's contamination. Apparently there's contamination on 60A. That is a city-owned parcel that's adjacent to ours. However, the whole purpose of the 2030 plan in identifying brownfield designated sites was to get these up to the best possible use, which is what exactly we are trying to do. With that being said, I'll let Tony speak to the actual issue of contamination and the soil testing that was done.
Did you want those maps pulled up during your presentation? I do have the map in the background and can pull it up.
Do you have the ability to pull up the one? There's two in specific. One shows it's color coded with it looks like boring test sites.
Is it this one?
I can't. My screen is black. Yes. Well, there's that one. We can start. Let's start with that one, please. Thank you very much, Danielle.
You're welcome.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony DeThomas, or as people know me as Tony. What Mike had said, that we had never made mention of a brownfield next door. When we first got involved with this project, we were 100% fully aware that of all of the environmental issues that were on the 60B lot, which is the city's lot. And the map that you have in front of you right there, showing that yellow circle and that red circle, that was from, I believe, 2006 from the Clough Harbor. I apologize for not being able to see the date. I think it was 2006. Part of that study that Mike is talking about, 2008. And in that study, which we, as part of our submission we made to the planning board, they bored, I think, 15 or 16 holes on the 60B lot, and that's where they came up with that area of red. That area of red in the 60B lot is the area identified as the contamination on the 60B lot. That yellow line that you see dotted there, when you look down, it's area of potential impact. They don't know whether or not when the person, I guess he had a refuse yard there or a dump. They don't know whether or not some of that material may have been pushed over. Now, it is true that I think back when you look at the records, back in the 40s or 50s, this lot was owned by Armory Garage. There's absolutely no evidence from any of the maps that there was ever any cars there, ever any work done there, or any parking there. It remained as a grass and wooded lot until essentially the city had filled it in from whenever they were expanded Colvin Avenue. And again, there's no evidence that there was ever anything there. We bought this lot. We already own it. I went to two of our lenders that we normally do business with, brought this to their independent engineering and say, because there is contamination at 60 and the work that was done on 60B and the work that was done on 60, would this be good enough for you, or would you require us to do more? Both lenders, through their environmental people, said there's been enough work done. As part of the 2008 Clough Harbor plan, which is not on here, but which is a map that was submitted to the planning board, there are, I believe, 8 separate borings that were done on our property. And if you show the other map, if you can show the other map, please.
Now,
Yep, I'm pulling it up.
maybe you can make, when we look at this map, please explain to people where the property, the 60 Colvin is located and which is 60 Bay.
I'm sorry.
Well,
Okay.
Danielle, then, if you could, and I apologize, can you go back to the original map? The one that was just on, I apologize. I just want to make sure, Kathy, you understand. If you,
I want everyone to understand.
okay, so you see where the red and the yellow is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And you see the dark outline of that lot?
yes.
That is 60B. That is city-owned property.
And where is 60 in relation?
It's at the very bottom of the page. It's right below it where the
Going towards the CHA.
so right down by the very bottom of the page, if Danielle, if you bring that right there, that piece of property is our property. So there's that piece of yellow dotted line where it comes under that black line there. That's the demarcation line between 60B on the top of the map and our lot on the bottom of the map.
Oh, that's it?
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so just so we're clear, where all those colored circles are, we don't own that.
You don't own that.
Okay. Now, if you go to Danielle, if you could go to the next map we provided.
Yep. Give me 2 seconds.
I got a quick question.
Sure.
So the yellow map, I've got it up on my screen. So your property is to the left where the yellow line, where the yellow oval goes into, or are you to the right?
We would be at the,
I don't know how your map is positioned on your screen. At the very bottom of the map I provided, there's a moniker for CHA, Clough Harbor Associates. Do you see that?
That's where they're at.
Okay. So if you look at your 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, if you go to the bottom of the page where that little yellow dotted line kind of sinks down below the darker, what would be the property line marker? You see what I'm talking about?
That's theirs.
That's ours.
So
It's like a sliver of that yellow line goes into their property.
It does.
yeah, that's what I just wanted to clarify.
Now, so
Okay,
now, Kat,
go ahead, Joe.
say back to your point, this map, if you could superimpose, if you would, what you see here on the entirety of this map is our parcel. To the right here, it says Anthony Street. That's the entrance into Westland Hills Park. Colvin Avenue is obviously demarked in the bottom of the map. And then if you go to the top, you can see the color codes, right? It's colored.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
At the top, the last blue and white box you see at the top right-hand corner of that map, just
Yes.
above that box, there is a dark black line.
Yep.
Black line?
Yep.
Same black line that's on the other map, that's the property line. So what's on the top of the page that you don't see is the 60B site. These borings that you see on this map are on the 60A, or our property, where the proposed development is. These are the borings that were done, and if that answers your question, I'll turn it back over to Tony to explain the borings.
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Right. So thank you. So if you're looking at this boring map, you know, we understood that there was potential contamination on 60B, and we knew that going in. And when we bought the year before, we bought 50 Colvin, which, if you're looking at the map, is this kind of shaded area right here. We bought 40 next door to that. And we did a phase 1 study there. 60 Colvin does not come up in the New York State DEC website as a contaminated site. However, 60B does come up, again, based on what Mike had said from the studies that were done. So if you look at all of those blue hatches on your mark, that was studies done by Dente Engineering, which Dente Engineering and I forget the name of the lab. It might have been Tectonic Lab that did the analysis of the soil that came out of there. That they did 60 and they did 60B. And it is from that study that was done by Dente Engineering that initiated the Clough Harbor study on the 60B lot to try to get some of that contamination cleaned up. But in all of those things that you see right there from Dente, there were absolutely no issues of contamination at any levels that were even approaching what the state would call recordable. So in other words, when the state DEC, if there's a spill and you spill, you know, a cup of gasoline, it is not recordable. But if somebody dumps, you know, 80 gallons of oil, that is recordable and you have to know it. So there's nothing in there that's done. The 2 borings that were done, you see those red hatches, B1 and B2, they were also done as part of the engineering that, as part of the Dente engineering plan. And all of that was done and studied.
When was the Dente engineering plan done?
I think it could have been 01. I think it was the Dente engineering that led to the Clough Harbor.
And that's what's referenced in the 2030 plan.
And that's what's referenced in the 2030 plan. Specifically, if you go down to the 2030 plan, down on the bottom of the brownfields, it specifically cites as the information, the Dente and Clough Harbor things in there, which again, don't have any contamination on our lot. They just happen to be purchased by, or were going to be purchased by the same entity. And we had done soil bearing test pits that were done by Dan Laux, who's a soil engineer. They're referenced there in the green. And then the black triangles were other ones done by Hennessy Engineering. Again, we hired him to confirm that what was done on the Dente report, we had that same match, and that came back as well. The 2 that were done closest down to Anthony Street were done by at the 2 black triangles were done at depths of 10 to 11 feet, as it shows in Bill's report. Until we hit groundwater, we couldn't go any farther because the holes were coming in. The 3rd one that's kind of in the center went down to almost 14 feet. But the 2 at the top, I believe, if you read his report, were 16 to 18 feet deep. And so they were quite extensive, quite deep. And we did this to make sure to basically prove what was done. So for Mike to say it is part of the 2030 plan, it is, but it is that engineering report from the 2030 plan that basically says the contamination is not on our lot, it is on the 60B lot, evidenced by the other map that you had first seen with the map showing where it is.
Okay, so Tony, can you just clarify the Dente study was done back in what, 2006? And then your study, of course, is done Hennessy and who else?
Right.
Laux.
Hennessy and Laux, our study, but I just want to, Dan Laux is a soils engineer, structural soils, not contamination. He did not take anything for testing, send anything out to a lab. He was looking at the soil density for the construction of a building. So,
Okay.
so that was that. But Bill Hennessy's soil samples were taken. They were sent out to a lab for the lab to do the analysis. And you know, the funny thing is that when Mike says, well, it's my engineer or whatever, he doesn't do the testing. It's not that Bill Hennessy took this stuff and brought it, you know, back into his garage and tried to light it on fire. It didn't work that way. He sent it out to a state registered and state approved facility that did whatever type of required testing that it takes to meet the DEC standards. And he did not come back with anything that would be considered above a state standard. So there's only so much. The idea that now we have the reports from 2000 and from the Dente report, whenever they are, 2004, 2002. We have the Clough Harbor report, was extremely extensive report done. We have stuff that was done by Hennessy Engineering. But now, because somebody listed our property on the 2030 plan, and I did not put that fact that our property was on the 2030 plan is absolutely ridiculous. And you know, one thing Joe didn't mention to you was that we own 28, we own 40, we own 50, and yes, we own the vacant lot at 60. But since we purchased that, there are 80 more jobs that are currently in those buildings in the last probably year and 3/4 since we bought it. The one building, 28, was 100% vacant. 40 Colvin was about 30% full, and 50 Colvin was almost 100% vacant. I think there were 2 odd little month-to-month tenants in there. So we did a mixed use at 50. We have 13 units going in. 10 of them are ready for COs, temporary COs next week. And I already have a list of 15 people wanting those 10. People love this neighborhood. Aside from what Mike says, people would love to be here. Of all of the projects I've ever done in the city of Albany, I'm most excited about this one.
Okay.
And this is the single most best walkable neighborhood that there is. And
All right.
I want to mention one other thing, that we have been to as many neighborhood meetings as I could attend. Joe has come, my brother, my other partner has come. I have listened to the comments from the neighborhoods, and I have done as much as I could possibly do to be within the city's code and to appease some of the neighborhood comments. The lady that lives in the back, she didn't want a building looking at her pool, so we moved the building forward and we lowered it down. We had 2 4-story buildings. Now I have a 3 and a 2 because they didn't want the 4th floors. Neighbors were concerned about parking. Even though we meet the requirements of the code, we changed our design plan to allow people to park behind 40 and 50 now, just to make sure if there ever was Super Bowl Sunday and a bunch of the tenants were having a party, nobody would be infringing on any of the park on Anthony Street, any of that parking. We have listened to everybody. We're working within the code, and we are really excited about this project. And to have Mike O'Brien single.
Okay. Tony, thank you very much.
Okay.
I think you did a great presentation on what you folks have been doing. So what I'd like to do now is open it up to questions and comments from first committee members and then the rest of the council. Anybody? I'm sorry, I've got to see what's going on here.
I see Michael O'Brien and Councilman Doche and Councilman Ballerin.
Okay, Judy, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Question for Brad. I know that we have provided some funding and the state has provided some funding for some brownfield planning brownfield site planning in the south end and the warehouse district along the Hudson River. Are we doing studies? How were those sites identified? Were they identified by us or somebody else?
They were identified by us. There are two of the sites that were called out in the 2030 plan, for example. Also, the Sheridan Hollow site has a BOA that's been underway by the Affordable Housing Partnership and related entities. I mean, I think with respect to those, I mean, with that, I think that answers your question. Did you want me to elaborate further, or?
Well, so with regard to your comment earlier that we don't have the funding to identify sites and do our own studies, have we done studies of those? How, I mean, so if those were identified in the 2030 plan and we're moving forward with the presumption that they are brownfield sites, as we're looking at this, then I think that that has some relevance to how, you know, why would we treat this differently, I guess.
I mean, the best case scenario, I think, is someone else pays for the testing and it turns up that there's no contamination. That may be the case here, and I think in that case, we don't have to allocate funding towards a study. I mean, in the case of the areas that I mentioned, those are much larger areas. They're, you know, some of them are 40, 80 acres in size. So you're dealing with many sites there, many of which probably aren't contaminated. Some of them are. The comprehensive plan essentially took several areas and sort of pre-nominated them so that they would potentially qualify for funding resources. That said, you know, it's 2020, we did the plan in 2012. So, you know, it's taken us 8 years to be able to get the funding to do those. I can't say that there's funding out there to do everything that was identified in the plan. So, I mean, I think they're different animals in a certain respect.
So Brad, I'm having a little bit of hard time understanding what you are talking about when you talk about larger sites, because when you say those that you identified, you're talking about those that were identified for the study that I'm referring to in the south end, in the north, and in the warehouse district.
We currently have grants to do a full brownfield opportunity area program in the two areas that you suggested, and we'll be pursuing that.
And so when we're doing that, are we doing further study to determine whether or not those indeed are brownfield sites? Ourselves.
There's a number of things that we do. We're going to try and identify, I think, the highest and best candidates that may require testing or further study. Obviously, if we can eliminate sites, we're going to do that.
And you mentioned these are like large sites, 20 to 40 acres. Is that? I mean, I thought that there was some specific sites that were highlighted. And, you know, I'm going back on my recollection from months ago when we had presentations, maybe 6 months ago.
The Westland Hills site is definitely the unique one that's called out because I think it's a total of 4.8 or 3.8 acres and it's just 2 parcels. But overall, there were 410 acres of land within the city that were within these potential pre-nomination areas. So within those other districts, there are a much larger number of properties, different owners, different complications. That part of what the BOA does is help you sort of sort all that out and figure out the best path forward to sort of eliminate or identify the brownfield so that they can be cleaned up, or eliminate the perception so that people are more apt to come in and take a chance on redeveloping them.
Okay, so with regard to actual development of those particular sites, how would we treat them when it comes to development? Are we looking to do studies on our own, or would we have developers?
Typically the way, I mean, it typically is the testing happens when the developer goes to get financing, and that's typically after our approval process. It's an environmental site assessment, and typically to get any sort of bank financing, you have to do that. So these things tend to work themselves out. That said, in the case of 60 Colvin, given the presence of the prior reports and the adjacent site, you know, it was, I think, warranted in this case where we have a particular site where we know there may be contamination, that the developer, you know, explore that. And I think that was brought up, and the developer has retained a professional to do that. And the results seem to be showing that there isn't, in fact, contamination there.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the other thing, Kathy, before we move on, I need to process some of this, but I'm trying to understand what is the difference if we determine something is a brownfield site. What is the difference that happens in the way that planning proceeds?
Okay, well, why don't we think a little bit more about that? And for right now, we'll go to Alfredo, who also had questions or comments. Alfredo?
Yes, I kind of want to go back to the maps. When was the Hennessy study? And when we're looking at the second map with the blue and green and red and black dots, what is the Hennessy, which ones are the areas where the Hennessy study dug in?
Danielle, can you put that up again?
The Hennessy map with the triangles, the.
Yes.
Yep. 1 second. And everyone.
Okay, so is Tony there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Tony, can you go over again, just give us an idea of the year that each of these studies were done? The Hennessy one.
Okay, well, I believe the ones that were in blue were the Dente report, and they were done prior to the Clough Harbor. I do not have that report with me, but I believe they were done 2002, possibly 2004. It was the Dente report that led to the Clough Harbor report in 2008.
Westland Hills Middle School.
Westland Hills Middle School investigation. Okay, I'm sorry. Joe was just showing me something on there. And then the ones that are in black that were done by Hennessy from his report, they were done this year. They were done just recently, you know, for our project, so that we could supply that to the planning board.
Okay, thank you. All right, Alfredo?
So the Hennessy are the ones that took the soil and had it tested, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
My question is, why wasn't any testing done closer to the border? Because if we look at the previous map, it said that there was some potential contamination closer to the border, but if we look where the testing was done, it was all done away from the border. So knowing the previous studies that there might be some contamination closer to the border, why wasn't any studies done closer to 60B?
Well, again, just based on from the Clough Harbor report, it's the approximate limits of impacted fill, approximate. There's no definite that the fill was there. And when we had, we sent an email to the city planning and building that we were going to go in to do some test bits, it was made notice to us that we really should not be cutting any trees of any substantial size to get a machine in there, which is unfortunately what we would have had to have done.
Also, isn't
To
it?
get all the way to the back, in that back area. And if you look at that back area, there was one there that was done by Dente that was in that fill area, or that approximate limits of fill area. And from the Clough Harbor report, there were ones that were done right up along the border as well.
Anything else, Alfredo? Could somebody unmute Alfredo? Thank you.
Thank you. So, there's so many different reports. It's just for my clarification. The 10th report was in 2001, correct?
I don't know the date, but I believe that I don't have it in front.
That was the first report, let's say.
Right, that was the report that the 2030 plan relied on.
That was the first one. The second report was done in 2008, which was the Cooper report.
Was the Clough Harbor report that was done for the Brownfield cleanup.
Now, if I'm correct, and I don't know if I am, but is it the 2008 club report that says that there may be potential contamination in 60, in part, just a small part of 60, 60A? And
on that map, again, it's potential fill. So it could be just dirt. It doesn't mean that there's contamination there. It's potential fill. And they judged that based on the borings that they did for 60B Colvin, that they took that area from whatever maps that it could be some of that dirt on our property. But it doesn't mean that there is any of that fill. Again, it says it right on their map, in approximate limits of impacted fill. And if you look at the scale of that map, you're talking about 30 feet from the property line. You're not talking about 50% of the lot.
No, I'm not saying it's 50. It's a small section of the lot. My concern is, you know, Hennessy doesn't have any way of testing that section of the lot.
Not without us getting in there, cutting trees
down,
and clearing a section of it. And there was a whole issue with the neighborhood and us cutting trees there that started this. So we were asked, kind of make sure you don't do any more disturbance to the land than you need to. So the smallest machine I owned was the one that was able to squeeze in between the trees and do the best it can to dig the pits that he dug.
Anything else, Alfredo?
No, thank you.
Anyone, any other comments? Council President
Hoyt.
Ellis. Tom, did you? Tom, we'll go to you first. Did you have comments?
Yeah, I have a few. I just got a couple of questions. Brad, real fast, the one brownfield that I'm aware of, you know, my history here in Albany was Boopsie's Garage. Were you involved in that at all, the cleanup there? And, you know, that was on TV and everything, and they got environmental funding, but it was the guy dumped oil, and it just spread.
I feel like that was just before my time here, Tom, or I may not have been involved. I remember hearing about the site, but I'm not familiar with what went on.
Okay, because this seems something similar. I was wondering, and then to Joe and Tony, what is the cost of doing testing? I have no idea. Is it excessive or?
I'm trying to think. I think to date we've probably paid Hennessy, you know, $3,000 to $5,000. I don't mean to blow that off. I just don't know. Bill Hennessy was the one. Hirschberg made the map survey that you see here. Bill Hennessy is right now making a report for basically all the holes that have done by the engineering firms in the past and submitting that to the planning board. Ideally, it would have been great if I had it tonight, but he's still going over all of the reports and all of the documentation, you know, that he had. And whatever I've already paid him or he's already billed me, this for sure would be more.
Okay, and then my final thing is, you know, we're talking about the contamination being soil, but if it was a junkyard and we know that junkyards are mostly cars. I've been to many a junkyard growing up that I had to get my parts there, and you'd walk in and the soil would be just covered with oil. And, you know, when the rain comes, the oil washes down, and then you get like a plume, an underground plume. And you talked about the groundwater being 10 feet under. Is there, I would just have a concern, has any kind of testing been done on that to see when this junkyard, could the oil have spread underground? Because we know these tests like 2001, that's like 19 years ago. We've had a lot of rain since, you know, over 19 years. Is there a danger that that contaminated oil and heavy metal and stuff like that that you get in older cars could have washed out?
It was never a junkyard with cars. It was deemed to be.
Yeah, the contamination that you see on the map in the red is the area in this map here was the area from when it was a dump, and the primary contaminants are essentially leads and heavy metals from the wood that was buried there and deteriorating. There could potentially be, I don't know. I only know that while we were digging the pits, the tester, the testing laboratory, whoever they have a guy on site, he has a meter that tests for volatile chemicals for all of the dirt as it's coming out, even when it's in the water. And I can tell you that none of that registered. I can't, I can't tell you if any water underground. I can't tell you that anywhere. But certainly, if there was anything here, it would be coming from the 60B site. If there was anything. But again, as we dug those pits, based on those tests from the Dente and ours recently, the meter, and I apologize for not knowing the name of that they test the soil with, did not register anything, and there isn't anything on Bill Hennessy's report showing that.
See, I had heard that there was a wrecking yard there, that they took apart cars. Now, I could verify with the person. It's actually my county legislator, Frank Camiso, told me that, you know, years ago there used to be, and I can verify that, but that was what I thought we were looking at. I didn't realize it was wood or something else. Thank you.
There's no question that happened in the rear of the property. There was no evidence that any of that ever happened on the lot on Colvin Avenue. If you look back at some of the maps that I know the name Sanborn comes, that they used to use for cities. I've seen them on title reports and other phase 1 studies. There isn't any indication that was the case on this property. There was there, but not on ours. And actually, if you looked on some of the maps, it was farther back into the park near where the tennis courts are.
Okay, thank you. Are you all set, Tom? Council President Ellis.
No, thank you, Kathy. I was satisfied with the report. I think it was thorough enough for the committee members. So I was just on to see, what people were saying. And from what I see, it seems like the property is not as much as I thought it would be in that contamination area. So I'm just hoping we continue to move forward and figure out the next steps forward. Because it sounds like these gentlemen went to neighborhood association meetings. I've never met these two gentlemen. Sounds like they're doing what they're supposed to do as being developers in a neighborhood. So I'm just hoping that we can really understand like the science behind, looking at those maps, because I thought it was more on their property than it was when I saw those maps. So that was the only thing I saw. So I have no questions for them.
Okay, thank you. We have Mike and Judy. Mike, do you want to go first, or Judy? Doesn't matter really. Judy, you still have questions, correct? So why don't we go ahead?
Yeah, well, I thought Mike had his hand up before.
First?
Yeah, well, before I even spoke the first time. So
well, committee members first.
Oh, I thought he was on our committee.
No.
Okay, so I'm struggling in general with this. One of it is that I'm very aware of the fact that the school district declined to build Westland Park School there based upon concerns about brownfield and contamination. And that's one of the things that is hovering back there. I get the impression that they're saying that the 2002 Dante blue study with the blue squares was done for the school district, but maybe we can start there and answer the question about what anybody knows about the school district's determination with regard to this that led to them not developing this site. Is
there anyone who has information about that? I mean, I remember it too, but it was a combination of environmental concerns, but also it was fought against very hard by the neighborhood. So it was kind of wasn't just environmental, it was neighborhood opposition too.
So it looks like Joe has some.
Okay, go ahead, Joe. Could you unmute Joe, please? Greenwich.
So Judy, can you hear me?
Yep, I can. Thank you.
So it's a multifaceted answer. As Kathy points out, I wasn't there. The 2030 plan references the fact that it was abandoned by the school district. There was a lawsuit that was filed by the neighborhood or members of the neighborhood to stop the school being placed there. But Judy, to your point, it's clear as day that when the school district was going to build the school, they were going to acquire what is now my lot or our lot and the city parcel. And we know as we stand here right now that the city parcel is clearly contaminated. That's sort of been the argument we've been making from the beginning. So I have to assume that the combination of factors of pending litigation and what may be or may have been significant environmental remediation that would have had to have been done by the district to build the school were factors in them not building it. But I just, again, want to point out, and I understand your concern, but the school district's desire to not build the school was not based on contamination on 60A, but clearly, as is in all of the plans that we know, on 60B.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just add one thing to that? In the Dente report, he is not only an engineer, environmental engineer, but he's also a structural soil engineer. And on the Anthony Street side of our property, if you read his report, the soil, and I think Mike had said it, that there used to be a pond down there. Well, that pond actually came on to the back corner of our property, and there is the water table there, and the ground is softer than what you could possibly put a 5-story building on. And in his report, they were developing foundations for that end of the building that were apparently too costly for them to move forward. Also including the environmental as well, that could be the case, but I know for a fact that that was a factor, was the soil analysis on the structural portion that was done there for the 4 or 5-story steel and concrete building they were going to build.
And just for sequence, I was involved in this, the rebuild plan for the city school district, but I thought it happened, the bond was passed in 2000. Was it in 2002? Were the 2002 Dante reports, was that specifically for the school district?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, thank you. So my struggle, what I'm trying to understand is, I'm a little surprised. I think that, Brad, what you're saying is when there's a potential brownfield site, we don't make developers do anything about it before we grant approval. It is a matter of when they go to the bank after our approval that they then need to demonstrate that That's what I kind of got out of what you were saying.
Well, I mean,
hoping I'm wrong.
typically prospective developers are discouraged from these types of properties or things that have that connotation. That's the purpose of the Brownfield program. So, I mean, this is sort of unique in that it came up. That's not to say there aren't other areas of the city that are designated as brownfields, but those are designated at a larger, you know, we know not every site within those areas is a brownfield. So no, we don't require testing of all those sites for contaminants prior to someone building that. That does, in fact, happen though before, you know, they build, because a bank isn't going to finance something, and if they're, you know, if they're a developer, they're smarter if they're looking into those things before they purchase the property as well. So it sort of works itself out, I think, to some respect. I mean, that's what I was trying to say. I mean, we don't require every property that becomes before us for approval to put test pits in the ground and do soil sampling. That's not a current requirement. And I don't know that
even when it's been designated in the 2030 plan as potential brownfield site.
That's why in this case we were, you know, pretty adamant that they had to do something. And they did provide us with this report, which we are scrutinizing to make sure it's sufficient. And we haven't made a final determination on that yet, but this kind of came up in the interim. Again, the planning board's not acting on this. It's not on their agenda this month. And, you know, it's something that we're still reviewing. So I think it's presumptuous to say that the planning board, and not that you said this, but is preparing to override the 2030 plan. I don't think that's the case in terms of the text of the plan, or the case that we're ignoring this issue in the context of the project.
So do we have something in the USDO that does establish a process when something is a potential brownfield site for what we then require?
I don't think brownfield is, I don't think the word is mentioned in the USDO.
Do we have for something for potential contamination, environmental contamination, or is it just generally the seeker review? Assuming the seeker review.
Yeah, I mean, seeker would cover that. I would suspect that there is generic language in the USDO as well that we can certainly use in the case that we need to require that of a developer, but there aren't specific guidelines around it.
Environmental contamination is also heavily regulated by DEC. So this is really a state issue when it comes up.
Okay.
So Brad, with regard to what this particular resolution says, essentially, it seems as though we would potentially be requiring a independent re-review of all brownfield sites before any development is done, regardless of there being an independent a study. I have to say that one of the things I struggle with is I really think we should, in some of these cases, and I don't mean some of these cases specific properties, but for specific issues that arise, I really do feel as though the city should be selecting the contractors, as you're indicating that some municipalities do, to make certain determinations and then have the developers bear that cost so that we feel as though we are getting a more likely independent review. And I understand people signing off on the certifications, but I also understand human nature, having worked on physician misconduct issues in the Department of Health, and some of the arrangements that were made with clinical laboratories and other providers, and the amount of referrals that would happen in some cases. And we have the same issue with drugs and et cetera, prescribing of drugs. So that while I appreciate that certification, I think we've seen enough history on a variety of areas where having being more assured of an independent review protects the public. I think that is my issue more so than anything else. But back to the resolution, could you tell me again what your perception is of the impact of the language in the wherefore clause with regard to development of other sites?
Well, so I mean, the entirety of the Sheridan Hollow neighborhood is called out in the 2030 plan in the same way that the 60 Colvin property is. So I guess what I'm sort of asking is that would this resolution mean that the expectation would be for any property within that defined area of Sheridan Hollow in order for them to do a project, and again, I'm not getting into scale or scope, let's say something that comes before the planning board, that then they would have to either amend the comprehensive plan or do some sort of testing regardless of whether there was any evidence that there may have been contaminants there. I think the goal of the Brownfield program, again, is to make it easier to develop these sites. I don't want to encumber the properties with an unneeded study or $3,000 to $5,000 if that's not something that's inevitably going to produce any results that are going to solve any problems for us. So that was my concern with respect to the resolution and the way it was written, specific to amending the comprehensive plan or the need.
Hey,
Thank
Judy,
you. Yep.
I'd like to move along. And Mike, you have comments.
Yeah, I don't know if yes. Anthony had mentioned he had gone to neighborhood meetings. Well, Anthony, and I believe Joe was his partner then too, had a previous proposal which they came forward to the neighborhood association on, and the neighborhood association had a number of disagreements with it, and they withdrew that plan from the planning board, and I believe that was about 1.5 years ago. And the only way we knew about the new plan was not by them sharing it with us, but the fact that I got an email from Zach Powell, and signs suddenly went up, posted on alongside of 60 Colvin Avenue, saying that there was going to be a planning board meeting on a major development there. So in terms of sharing, I think there was a little bit of misstatement as to how freely they were sharing with us. And, one of my big points is, to me, the size of the area should not diminish the site's importance to health and environmental risks. And I think as Alfredo, and I think Judy also was pointing out, but I remember Alfredo noting that the orange line or yellow line indeed goes into 60. Maybe not all of it, but it indeed goes into 60. And, I don't know what, obviously, I wasn't even thinking about Sheridan Hollow or the warehouse district, or the fact that, I was aware, as Judy had pointed out, that we got some funding to pursue study in that area. But I don't think that the issue of funding, I mean, obviously, if this, if we chose an engineer to study it, the developer should be expected to fund that. And I thought that mechanism of study was utilized a lot by Albany and other municipalities. The other point is seeker. It was mentioned, well, seeker looks at all of that, but my understanding is that these developers come in and are seeking a negative declaration on seeker. Maybe we should have a full seeker. But, as to the other sites in the city, I quite frankly did not consider them, but I would certainly say that if there is a health or environmental risk, they are as deserving as Colvin Avenue to make sure that it is adequately studied. And that's the goal. And, if people want to make suggestions on language, if people want to make suggestions on language, I'm willing to hear it. But
Okay,
I think
Mike, yeah, I want to stop now and we'll go to public comment and then we'll wrap it up after public comment.
Okay.
Danielle?
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. We received several public comments. I feel in the tune of 15. And of those 15, a couple were received after the 12 noon deadline, Madam Chair. So if you want those included in the ones that we read, they're all relatively brief.
I think, you know, just the ones that we received on time in this instance, because we have received text copies through the email.
Perfect. So the first comment is from Deborah Holner of 40 Claremont Street. And she says that she's emailing in support of the resolution on Brownfield at 60 Colvin Ave. The second comment is from Lisa Somerville of 40 Claremont Street. And hers mirrors the first. I am emailing in support of resolution of Brownfield at 60 Colvin Ave. The next comment comes from Mary Jo Ehrlich of 109 Colonial Ave. I am writing in support of Mike O'Brien's resolution 627120R to safeguard the environment when approving construction of new developments. And the next comment is from Mark Castiglione of 50 Parkwood Street. His comment reads as follows. Resolution 627120R. I do not support this resolution. It's yet another attempt to politicize an administrative development review process. There is nothing the Common Council can do that will have a more chilling effect on development and redevelopment in the city of Albany than continue to unnecessarily insert themselves in the development review process. Further, the content of the resolution is silly. It's like saying that since the comp plan suggested a vacant parcel could be a community garden, we have to go to the Common Council to review developments proposed on those lots. It also ignores the central role of the planning board to review development in the city and state mandated environmental review. It would set a dangerous precedent. There is another comment from Katina Mavadnes. My name is Katina Mavadnes, and I live at 59 Melrose Avenue. I'm speaking in support of Councilman O'Brien's resolution 627120R. The proposed site of the apartment complex is 60 Colvin Avenue. A phase 1 environmental study indicated that there is asbestos and other heavy metals such as lead in the subsoil at that address. Indeed, there once was a proposal to place a new middle school on that particular site. However, there were high levels of lead contamination found underneath the ground. Understandably, because of health concerns, that project was shelved. In the intervening years, what has changed? There has only been an ill-advised clear cut of the said area in 2019. Regrettably, there has no effort to mitigate the contamination or even to do the correct soil testing by the property owner or developer. Currently, there are multiple lawsuits in cities such as East Chicago, Illinois, Geneva, New York, because they overlook the problems of lead contamination in the soil. Does Albany, New York want to be added to that undistinguished list? And those were all the comments that were received within the.
Thank you, Danielle. Okay, so we have to make a decision about this resolution. I'm sorry, Joe, you're going to have to hold off.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I have another comment to add that came in relatively.
Go ahead.
My name is Maria McNulty and I live at 108 Claremont Street, just across from Colvin Ave for nearly 30 years. I'm very concerned about the brownfield situation on 67. According to the DEC, there are dangerous levels of lead as well as other toxins, which I assume is why the site was designated as a brownfield by the planning department in the first place. For that reason, I'd like to speak in support of Councilmember O'Brien's resolution 6270R, which protects those of of us who live in the immediate neighborhood from having the Brownfield designation unilaterally declared void by the planning board at the behest of the developer. There is already a process in place for changing such designations, and it should be based on current valid studies that are transparently shared with all stakeholders. It seems self-evident to me that the final decision should be subject to common council approval. And it also looks like Amy Lolick provided a written comment in support of resolution 627120R as an important measure of neighborhood protection against containment soil conditions outlined in the 2030 Brownfield plan. And then the other comments came in after the deadline, but as you mentioned, Madam Chair, they were forwarded to the entire Common Council at large.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to make my comment on this. I agree with Judy about, you know, maybe just to take this second guessing out of it as far as, you know, the study that's done, the contamination study that's done. I agree. If it's not, we're not talking about 3,000 to 5,000. It does seem to make sense that it be ordered by the planning department. So there can't be that second guessing that, oh, the developer had, you know, somebody do the study. So it could be biased. That makes sense. So I hope the planning department will think about that as we go forward. As far as the resolution though, Mike, this resolution is about that last now therefore in the resolution, and it says the Common Council declares that if the planning department or planning board believes that any 2030 plan site designation or characterization is in error, it should not make any such ruling on its own, but instead refer back the matter for consideration in the same manner by which the 2030 plan itself was enacted. That means go back to the council. But in this case, in the Albany 2030 plan, I can't help but think about what it says in that Appendix A with regards to brownfield opportunities. It talks about potential. It does not say that there is definitely contamination there. So I don't think, you know, we can say that the planning board is disagreeing with the Albany 2030 plan in this instance. So that matters to me, and you know, I do think in this case that the developer has given a pretty complete report of looking into the contaminated site, and so I'm not sure where we're going with this, and so I welcome other people's input, and if anyone has a motion they want to put on the floor. Who do we have?
Councilwoman Doche.
Judy. She's muted.
Thank you. And thank you for calling on me because I'm trying to get the raise hand little indicator and that wasn't coming up for some reason. So here's my take on this. I would feel a lot more comfortable if the city hired somebody to go back and actually do some drillings in that area closer to the edge with lot 60B. And I understand the sensitivity about the trees, but as I drive down that lot, everything was so, looking so awful as it is, actually going in and making sure that we're doing what needs to be done in order to help protect the public. in this case, I think, is the, is the concern. The other studies and everything that has been shared makes sense, but as Alfredo had pointed out, they didn't really go back and test right within the yellow area that was identified as a potential brownfield area. So since that's the area that was identified as a potential brownfield area, it seems like that's the area that really should have some testing on it. So, from my standpoint, that is what I would feel more comfortable having been done here, or actually for the developer and the planning department to commit to doing. And again, hiring somebody independent to go back, not to redo all the other, duplicate the other studies, but to go back into that particular area that has been identified. I think if we want to protect residents, that is what is our obligation. If we want to alleviate concerns that they're still developing on an area where there is potential brownfield, then I think that's what needs to be done. I don't think that this resolution does that. And I am concerned about the whereas clause in this. I do think that this discussion highlights some of the things that we need to look at in the USDO with regard to identifying what is the council's expectations with regard to sites that have been identified as brownfield previously, and again, protecting the public. I used to live in Sheridan Hollow. It's near and dear to my heart. On the one hand, I want to make sure that residents there are protected. I am aware of some of the history there, where there is legitimate concerns for making sure people are protected. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we don't stand in the way of development there. And I am concerned that there are a lot of 1 and 2 and 3 sequential vacant lots in that area that have it would seem maybe unduly onerous to do an entire brownfield study on without providing a history and justification for those particular lots before we require that. So, or to require people to now, all developers now come back to the council to make a determination, have us make a determination that that is not a brownfield site. And I agree with Kathy. It looks to me as though these were identified as potential brownfield sites, and that's important for us to be conscious of that, but it's potential. So, what is the process for us moving forward, ensuring public safety? I also want to note that there's a lot of development that has been going on in Arbor Hill and Sheridan Hollow that I don't think that there has been a lot of attention paid to with regard to these issues. And I'm not comfortable picking and choosing for particular sites how we deal with it. My concerns and my issues are that we have standards and that we require all developers to comply with those particular standards. Finally, I want to note that this is a resolution as opposed to an ordinance. So I don't know how much impact and protection that is, and that's why I think we should be looking at potential modifications to the USDO that apply and make sense in protecting, balancing the protection of the public versus the allowing development in these areas.
Right, thank you, Judy. Alfredo? And then Mike, I'll go back to you. And then we've got to do something.
I agree with Judy, but I also want to say if this affects development in other areas, there's been effects that have been designated as brownstone because we want further studies, I don't see that as a bad problem, to be honest with you. And I know you've mentioned neighborhoods that have challenges and have struggles. Why would we want to have people live in those buildings that have issues? Why would we want to build buildings in those neighborhoods that already have challenges, if it's contaminated? Why wouldn't we want to make sure those neighborhoods get the same reviews that Colvin Avenue gets? It'd be a shame. It'd be a shame if we allowed those neighborhood projects to go forward without the same scrutiny that we allowed the projects in Colvin Avenue. All those individuals, where you live on Colvin or where you live anywhere else in the city, have the same rights to be safe in their homes. I have a problem with the fact that the city knows 60B has been contaminated and hasn't done anything to address that issue. This is right next to a park. If you use the park like I do, you know that you're cutting that edge of the park where 60B is and 60A is a dog park. Where you have your dogs, where I've had my dogs go out and play. So why can't the city address that? I mean,
Alfredo, can we address the substance of this resolution though?
Well, to me, the substance is we need to be doing everything we can to make sure all of our residents are safe. And we need to do, and if we have a potential issue, we should address it before we allow for it to be developed, so that we make sure we're keeping all of our current residents and all of our future residents safe from living in lands that's contaminated.
Okay, Mike?
Well, am I muted or not? Oh,
no, we hear you.
One of the reasons I brought it as a resolution, which Judy pointed out, its resolution is not as forceful as an ordinance, was because I was worried about the time frame that an ordinance probably would not get adopted. I agree with the points that Judy made. I think the ordinance needs to be amended, carefully looked at. But I brought it only as a resolution because, and this isn't to diminish Sheraton Hollow and the protection that those people deserve, but I was focused on a problem that I was most familiar with and felt that it was being approached in haste, and indeed without even being mentioned, at least in the application process. So the wherefore seems to be the problem, and I'm amenable to the wherefore being amended. I would be amenable if the planning board would agree to the fact that there needs to be an independent investigation of those soils identified with lead contamination that could have seeped into, and apparently, according to some of the evaluations, probably did seep in to 60 as opposed to 60B. But I don't know. The planning board has no indication that they're willing to do that. So I felt an immediacy and an urgency in bringing this in the fashion that I did.
Okay, well, we've had a pretty full discussion on the issue, and that's something that Brad could take back and we can have further discussion on. But I think for tonight, I'd like to table the resolution. I don't see that it's ready to go forward to the council.
Well, we don't have any promises. I mean, this thing, Brad said they're not going to make a decision in July, but he didn't say they're not going to make a decision in August, and it's going to affect a number of people. So I don't think tabling it is the real solution. If you want to tweak the wherefore, I'm certainly amenable to that.
Okay.
I think we should take a vote of the committee.
There's no one putting a motion forth. Judy?
So I want to note that there is some other stuff within the resolution itself with regard to the way it is written that I think based upon some of the information that we have, it's either extraneous or not completely accurate. Mike, I think that you can probably accomplish the same thing by writing a letter. And here's the thing, is I do think, it's appropriate for us to say to the planning board and to the planning department, we think that there should be an independent evaluation of and study where there hasn't been of the rear, along the rear lot line of this, and to encourage them to do that. But I think you need to lay that out in either a letter or the whereases as to why we would be asking for that specific relief. So I think that kind of request for additional study, you might not be happy with that because I think that you want a different result here, but that is something that I would favor. I want to make a motion to table. I note that a motion to table, when seconded, is not debatable under our rules, and therefore we would move to a vote on the motion to table if there's a second.
Do we have a second?
You can second it, Kathy.
I will second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All against? Okay, abstentions? 2 abstentions. All right, so it passes.
No, it fails. You need a majority of the
Oh,
community.
good point. We need a majority. All right. Well, we can talk about coming back to the table. Tonight, we don't have anything to put, anything else to put forth. So I'm going to make a motion to adjourn for tonight. Is there a second?
We still have the project.
What about the other project?
Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize. I meant from this, we're going to move to the ordinance. All right, thank you very much, everyone who was here for the resolution. Joe, thank you, Tony. All right, and now we're here to discuss finally ordinance 96120, and we're talking about the seeker. And I'm going to turn it over to John Raphael. You said you were going to send a PowerPoint or something. I don't know.
Michelle sent out the PowerPoint, and Kelsey, you do have authority to share, so go right ahead.
I didn't get that.
It was a link.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was OneDrive for the document. Yeah.
Oops. Good evening, everyone. I'm gonna, if you're ready for me, I'll just kind of jump right in. I know it's been a late night, and everyone on your team and our team is eager to move to the next thing this evening. Kels, can you go the next 2 slides? So when we appeared before you last week, we spent a lot of time talking about the different standards of review for a zoning map amendment. And I want to just highlight D, E, and F here, which talks about community need, and just wanted to add a few more insightful points about our project, some of which I learned in between last meeting and this meeting. So go advance a slide. And then, so this is compatibility with existing and proposed uses. And so my point here is specifically to talk about adjacent properties. Next slide. So when designing commercial spaces, most developers are looking to get the highest return on investment. And one of the nuances that I didn't learn until this week was that the South End development really was looking more towards building community than, layering their pockets with more profit. And so if you look at some of the uses that we have, I would say more than half of the uses that we have, they don't have the high return on investment that, say, a bank would, or a financial consultant, an insurance agency. Instead, they focus on things that the community needs. And those areas of commercial use that we have in our project that are typically located in, kind of lower rent districts or strip malls would be daycare and dry cleaning, religious or community centers, the aquaponic garden. None of those things are being integrated into this this development because of the high return on investment. Instead, they're being integrated into this because we think it will be both beneficial for the residents of the 76 itself, but more so for rebuilding the community. And that's the entire goal of South End development here. They could do this project in other areas. They could probably get land to build this project at a better price and maybe have an easier time developing it because of regulations in different municipalities. But they're very, very committed, as the Common Council president said at the end of our last meeting, really to building community. And that community doesn't just benefit the people who live in the 76, it really benefits anybody who can walk to this site. They will suddenly have access to food and not need to get in their cars. They will suddenly have access to daycare in close proximity to a school and a park. There will be opportunities for learning about sustainability and about farming and many other things. And also just the community building of the public spaces that have trees and benches and places where people can gather. So go ahead to the next slide. And you'll see the hub of this certainly is a grocery store, because we think people come to get food. If it's in walkable distance, probably a few times a week, but there's also these other uses like the daycare and the fitness center that we think will benefit people surrounding this area. Go ahead to the next slide. The community benefit is also in the quality of housing. And so 60% of this is affordable. The affordable and the market rate look identical, and that's something that we're very proud of here. Next slide. One of the comments that you had during the last slide was, is there space for families here? Or is this, either an empty nester or area for elderly? And this layout shows you 3 bedrooms, and maybe Kelsey can kind of point out the 3 separate bedrooms that are kind of located on the, 1, 2, and on the far end, the 3rd one. And then there's 2 bathrooms, there's plenty of living area space, and also the kind of the unit to the left can be fully sustainable. It has its own living space and bathroom, a kitchenette and a bedroom, but it also can be integrated into the whole. And so we're calling this a micro studio and would work very well for a family situation. The penthouse also is 2 stories, so that is another feature that I wasn't aware of. The penthouse units have 2 stories, and so they also may be more amenable for family living. Go ahead to the next. And so one of the things that was asked, and we kind of went back around, this is the affordability mix that we are aiming for. We don't have control over all of this. The New York State HFA and HCR control the rental mix and the price, but this is what we're aiming for, which is 60% affordable. And of that 60%, 20% would be affordable senior, and 40% would just be plain affordable, and then the additional 40% would be at market rate. Go ahead to the next slide. And then, so one of the things I'm not sure that we spoke about was job creation. So the construction phase of this is anticipated to have 1,000 jobs during the construction phase. And this is modular construction, and we have weighted that number based on the modular type of construction as opposed to kind of normal construction where they build it from the ground up. Upon completion, we anticipate 150 full-time jobs, and that's based on the uses that we showed in the previous charts. Next slide. And so one of the other issues that was raised was about Krank Park and whether we were planning on doing anything with Krank Park. And since the time that we presented to you last, we've actually reached out to who we think are kind of the logical partners in Krank Park to start the discussion about both the management of the park and improvements to be made to the park. And we anticipate, you know, in the next many years of construction, and then once we're built, significant changes happening to the park, obviously with the city's blessing because it's your park. But we anticipate trying to really coordinate the partners, the people who benefit and utilize the park, to make really significant improvements of this really important asset to the area. Go ahead. And I'm going to turn this over now to Kelsey, who will probably bring in Jim Garrison to talk about different components of the more technical things that you were interested in as we move into more seeker impacts of the project. So Kels?
Sure. So as we touched on last week, the project will employ the latest technologies to achieve the highest levels of sustainability with triple net zero design. So we'll have zero energy, zero water, and zero waste. And as discussed, the environmental benefits are kind of inherent to this type of design, but I'd like to take just a deeper dive into the benefits to the existing public infrastructure. And so this chart provides a comparison of the demand for electricity and water, as well as the generation of stormwater and waste. And so the current values here are based upon the 14 existing structures that are currently on the property. And then the peak demand and generation numbers are based upon build out of 32 two-family homes on the existing 32 properties under the current zoning. And so these numbers are slightly conservative because technically the 5 properties along 2nd Avenue could be upgraded to other commercial uses under the MUNE zone. And then the column for the 76 obviously is based upon the proposed development that includes roughly 50,000 square feet of commercial space and 239 residential units. And so as you can see, the demand and the generation for energy, water, stormwater, and waste are mostly going to be declined, with the exception of the demand for water. And so this 8.97 million gallons per year, this is actually the minimum value of potable drinking water that we are required to draw from the municipal system by state regulation. And so if you look at this though in comparison, 1.3 million gallons per year is based upon 13 structures, 13 two-family homes. And the increase is not all that significant to accommodate our larger development of 239 units with 50,000 square feet of commercial. And that's going to be achieved by significant application of water reducing technologies. And then when it comes to stormwater, we will be eliminating all of the stormwater flow down to zero discharge by reusing 100% of the stormwater on site. And we will also be removing all of the waste from the landfill to result in the net zero waste category. And then another thing that I just want to note, which I'll talk to a little bit more, is when it comes to stormwater, we're also evaluating the potential to eliminate additional flow from the combined sewer system through some offsite improvements. So for net zero energy, New York State obviously has very ambitious climate targets, which include 100% carbon-free electricity generation by 2040. So in alignment with this goal, we're seeking net zero energy certification through the International Living Future Institute, which mandates that all energy to support the development must be produced on site. So this diagram here shows each of the renewable energy sources that we will be using on the property, as well as the demands associated with the residential and commercial uses, which we are achieving at lower rates through energy efficient technologies. And then the end result in terms of energy will actually create a net positive energy generation, and that energy will be returned to the grid. The next piece is net zero water. And so this is truly a holistic approach. So we'll first reduce the potable water demand to the greatest extent possible through water efficient fixtures. We'll then maximize water reuse where 100% of rainwater and stormwater will be captured and reused on site. So this diagram on the right shows that we'll have rain that will fall on the existing buildings as well as the site that will be reused for site irrigation, the aquaponics and greenhouse, the building facade, which will have those vertical planters on the balconies. And then in addition, 100% of the gray water and black water produced by the site will be treated on site, and a portion of that from this direction here will be treated and polished so that it can be reused for the residential toilet flushing. And then any excess treated wastewater will then be discharged to the separate storm sewer that will be constructed as part of the project at a controlled rate. And so the ultimate end goal is that this means that zero wastewater and stormwater will be discharged to the city's combined sewer system.
This is where everybody explodes and cheers. Yay! Little comic relief, it's late.
So to take this just a little bit step further, we are working very closely with the water department because we recognize we are targeting a very sustainable project. And so we don't want to have that level of improvement and then also be aware and recognize that there's significant issues with the infrastructure in that surrounding neighborhood. So we are working with the water department to evaluate areas within the adjacent watershed where we can potentially partner with the city to provide offsite improvements to provide additional reduction in the flow to the combined sewer. And so this map here on the right are basically, we've got our project site. Like I said, we're eliminating 100% of the stormwater by reusing it on site. And then we have 4 additional watersheds that we've identified where there are potential offsite improvements that could be implemented. And so in this map, the green line is the combined sewer system within the area. The purple is, there's actually a separate, what the city considers a separate storm sewer system, which does have 2 connections to the combined sewer where there's a flow regulator at First Ave. There's also a second flow regulator at South Pearl Street. And so in partnership with the city, we're hoping that we can provide some upgrades at those 2 flow regulators so that we can then target potentially these 4 watersheds to eliminate the flow of stormwater 100% from the combined sewer. And I can go into far more detail, but ultimately with our site, we'll have 2.55 million gallons per year of stormwater removed. And with these other 4 watersheds, there's the potential for an additional 21.5 million gallons per year of stormwater that could be eliminated. And just to give you some perspective, the combined sewer overflow that this area is tributary to has roughly a total annual overflow of 94 million gallons per year. So this potential disconnect could be as much as 25% of a reduction of those annual overflows.
You know, I just want to say, and we're not commenting, all these things are absolutely amazing, amazing goals. I mean, if you're able to accomplish, you know, half of these, it's pretty incredible. So
thank you. Yeah, we're working very hard.
We're all muted, so it's hard to, and it has been a long night. So I just wanted to make that comment. But we're excited.
We really appreciate that.
And I'll say one thing, as someone who sat in a 4-hour meeting, I know Kathy did as well, about floatables. Yeah, I mean, that is good news to hear.
It's huge.
Awesome. So the next piece that I want to just talk about is the net zero waste component. And so on-site waste for the property will be collected in a multi-stream approach with a waste handling room with designated chutes for recycling, bagged compost, and the remaining solid waste on each of the floors of each building. And so residents are actually going to have a key fob where they'll have access to these chutes. And when they log in their key fob, it'll actually monitor and track the weight of waste that they contribute to the stream. And so we'll be able to track that and then develop a program to incentivize waste reduction. But in addition to that, there's going to be on-site waste handling that will be completely managed by SED. The split stream recycling will be partnering with County Waste. And then there's going to be a significant community reuse program. And as part of that, we're actually going to develop a program with local artists and craftsmen where they can repurpose waste materials. And so in addition, there's going to be a significant and educational opportunities here with where both residents as well as the community can be educated on recycling and waste reuse programs. And the community, there'll be a community composting component where we will partner with the Radix Center with their community gardens. And then any additional excess waste that remains will then be collaborating with Wheelabrator Technologies, where that waste will actually be converted to energy. So the end result will be that 100% of the waste will be diverted from landfills. And so since last week, this is actually an updated rendering of the property. So it does show some of the changes that we're outlining in between buildings C and D. But this is the greenhouse aquaponics area. And then the waste and loading dock area will be here in a lower level building, but that will have a green roof on the top. And then I think actually, JR, if you're able to give Fred Bellholm the control, he can give us a walkthrough of the 3D model.
JR, you're muted. Whoops.
Yep. All right. Let me see. Where is Fred?
While JR and Fred are doing that, I just want to give you just a quick update. We did have an opportunity to listen into the planning board this week as they talked through their agenda in workshop form for the meeting that's 2 weeks from now. We are hopeful, fingers crossed, that we are able to respond to the issues that were raised, and we didn't see any large issues. We've got to tweak the application a little bit on site plan, a little bit on parking. We've got some inconsistencies in height, so we're making some modifications to that. We're also providing some clarity with regard to the 2 properties that we have not been able to get site control over. So we'll be updating a little bit on that, but they think that they will be in position to give their recommendation at the meeting, which I think is the 27th or the 28th. So just wanted to let this subcommittee know that we anticipate a recommendation may be forthcoming in the next few weeks.
Okay, great, thank you.
Fred, you can go ahead.
And now's the fun part. Jim and Fred have created an amazing video, and I think Jim's going to walk you through while Fred does the control of the 76 project. So we hope you enjoy the video. We're sorry we can't provide any popcorn, but relax and enjoy.
Well, Fred, I see it's shaking around a little bit. Do you think it'll start moving?
Yeah, I can move around.
Oh, we're not going to do a video. We're going to do a move around. Okay, sorry. I thought we had prepackaged that walkthrough.
No,
all right.
fine.
Yep. All right. So this is a model, and it's a digital model, and it's constantly updated. We're looking at the project from the east. And Fred's rotating, and pretty soon we're going to look down Scott Street, and we can see the ramps and terraces leading up to Scott Street, and the dining tables and the greenery and so forth. And you can see the on the top of the building the photovoltaic arrays, and of course you can see the church. And all right, so Fred, if you want to come down to 2nd Avenue. So this is a little out of date because the 2nd Avenue face, we've dropped it by a floor. And, but you can see the effect. And here's the idea of the balconies and the full height door windows, which will be big tilt and turn units. So you can come out on the balcony and you can grow things. And in some cases, balconies have photovoltaics. We planned this upper level on 2nd Avenue to have a wellness center, urgent care center, and there's a pool in between the two levels. Well, go ahead, Fred. So this is a walk from, so what we wanted was as enclosed, safe, and convenient a way to circulate through the site as we could have, with accessibility, with the built into that. So there will be lifts and elevator access at each turn. So now we're in a courtyard that has the church on the east face. Fred's just turning around. He's looking back towards 2nd Avenue. And if he keeps turning, we'll see the pool, which is just really a block right now. And these spaces that right in front of us are co-working spaces. And then we'll develop the landscaping and the use of this courtyard. And then if we keep going, we have to keep coming down the hill, and we'll have, again, access to an elevator, but we'll come down and we'll arrive at Scott Street. And we'll come out to Scott Street, and Scott Street's really meant to be the active center of things. It's meant to have a market, a restaurant, cafe, bakery. It will have a bank on one corner. It will have a barbershop and a place where you can go and learn about STEM, the various STEM issues related to the building, and we'll have a place that's really a public presentation and education area. And we'll have a place where you can buy plants and learn about how to plant in a vertical garden. So Fred's now coming down the stairs with the ramps to the right. He's coming down to Krank. So it's Krank Street, and he turns and looks down the hill toward the park. And all these facades are being developed, and the next time you see this model, you'll see a lot more going on here. We're opening up these parking levels so that you'll actually be able to see out from them and have a pleasant experience when you do park your car. The parking at the moment is inside those orange yellow bases. And all right, well, Fred, why don't we just, yeah, all right, we'll go up through and come up the stairs and terraces. And we can come back to the center passage and walk through. We'll see a lobby on our left. We'll see a garden store on our right. We'll come out and we'll view over a hydroponics garden. Now, what we've done with this is we have made a greenhouse with this hydroponics. And we've done that at the suggestion of our farming and gardening consultant, who has indicated that if we use greenhouse, of course, we can operate it all year round, and we can increase the productivity to the point where this actually is providing real food content. I mean, enough quantity to make a real contribution to things. And this area in front, which at the time this rendering was done, right in front of us here, was a drive, only a drive, but now this has become a complete loading dock, trash recycling, all forms of in and out for this building will take place undercover here. Opposite it is facing Leonard Street, and opposite it is a berm, a hillside without a hill on it. So it's a very good place in terms of the neighborhood. It won't be seen, and we're going to make sure it's inside so it won't be heard. All right, let's come around. And we're providing actually 3 truck berths there because of the quantity of activity that's going to be taking place there. So this will feel similar in the end, but it'll have a little different expression. There's another lobby for building D, which faces Krank Park, down at the bottom of the hill. And next time we show it to you, we'll show you some evolution and how things have improved and been refined. You can see, by the way, that the cores, where the elevators and the stairs are located, are glass. And when you come out of the elevator, you look outside. And if you take the stair, you look outside. And it's important because it allows people to see one another, both from the street and from these cores. and it makes the experience much more pleasant as well. And we've worked through these. In this model, you don't see the modifications to these edges and corners. We've actually dropped a floor off of this Krank Street side in some of these corners. And we've done that for a couple of reasons. Well, yeah, we can actually see some of it here. This is, no, you don't see it. This is where it has taken place though. And the idea behind that is to reduce the scale at Krank Street and also to make some very generous outdoor spaces for the tenants of the building to come and enjoy themselves. And we'll have some communal space, shared communal space on those roofs as well. All right, so that's the walk around.
Oh, pretty amazing, really.
We're happy to answer any questions that you may have about any of this. Thank you so much, Jim and Fred. It really is an incredible experience to be able to see a building conceptualized like this. Almost never happens.
Well, I mean, for those of you who are wondering, you know, the modular components of this building are actually built into this model already. So the detail is actually being built up. This business with the balconies, we've evolved this approach to housing using continuous balconies because they help control sound. They keep reflected sound from the street to a minimum. They give people a sense of the outdoors and some convenience, and they keep the heat of the sun off the facades and the windows during the height of the summer. With these buildings, our modern buildings now are so well insulated that they, even in Albany, they use more energy for air conditioning than they do to heat. So we really have to take seriously how heat builds up during the summer. So those balconies are part of that.
Councilwoman Doche.
Thank you. I raised my hand for one question, but I have another question. You're using the term continuous balcony, and while I'm looking at the graphics, I'm not quite sure what that means. Can you walk along the entire balcony from one unit to the other?
No, there's a divider, but the balcony is not broken up. It is on every module or every face. So it shades the entire facade of the building. Okay. So in other words, yeah, and that's actually probably a term that we talk about because in the old-fashioned housing legislation, a lot of times it was required that the balcony only be on a percentage of the facade because they didn't want you creating too much shadow for the building. But they never imagined these kinds of solutions in those days, and this is a different kind of setup.
Okay, thank you. But my real question is, I believe that what you just showed us assumes that the two buildings for which people have indicated that they want to stay in their home would be selling. Do you have, is that correct? And if so, do you have, can you show us Second Avenue as it would look if those individuals decide not to sell their properties?
That's correct. Fred, can you pull up the image with the smaller building on Second?
Maybe.
So we do have kind of plan A and plan B, just to address your question. We're showing what we would love to be building on that front parcel, but it may not be possible. And if it's not possible, we've got, yeah, so that's a perfect. So if you look at the center, that's the where it says phase 2. Yep, thank you very much, Fred. That's, kind of a condensed size of a building. The one to the right of it is what we want to build, but if we don't get site control, we build the one in the middle. We haven't modeled.
What will it look like? from the front, from the Second Avenue side? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, Jim, do you want to address that? It'll look like half of what you've just seen.
Do you have a picture? Do you have a picture?
We do. I'm not sure we have it immediately available, though. We have looked at it. Let's see what we can find.
In the meantime, do you want to go to Tom? Well, they're looking for that.
Sure. I just have two comments. I was thinking afterwards, I like the idea with the balconies, but if we do have families there, they seem low. Can kids climb over those balconies, and especially on the upper levels?
They're 42-inch balconies, so they're the requisite height, and that's a pretty good height. I mean, that's evolved to be the standard.
Okay. And then my second question, and I haven't investigated it myself. I was planning to try to get down this weekend. The Port of Albany is pretty close. I think it's within, as the crow flies, maybe a mile. And I know in the summertime, especially now with these oil trains and stuff, you get a lot of fumes. And somebody told me even the molasses that they process down there causes a lot of smell. And you were talking about using a lot of air. Have you looked into that, or is that a concern?
Well, that's a moving target, right? I mean, the quality of urban air is a moving target. And if there is a problem, these buildings will have high volume heat exchange ventilation. They're fully ventilated. Now, the truth is that most apartments built today are still not actively ventilated. They have an exhaust for the toilet, and that's it. And the exhaust for the toilet can't really do much because there's no makeup air. So these will have makeup air, and they will have twice the ventilation capacity of standard apartment house construction. Now, I doubt that will pull odors in from the environment. If we do, and if we find it's a problem, we could filter the air. But hopefully we're not to that point.
Alfredo?
No.
I had two questions. Question number one had to do with the micro studios in the 3 bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Last time we met, it was mentioned that the renter of the 3 bedroom might be able to rent out that studio.
That's right.
I find that as someone that believes in rental income as a way to build wealth for individuals and to get out of poverty, I like that idea. My question then is, who would be responsible for the contract lease for that studio? Would it be the actual individual that's renting, or would they still have to get approval from the building site?
Alfredo, we don't know yet. I mean, the thing is, ideally, we would move toward a tenant ownership program. But the tax credit structure and the way financing is done for affordable housing doesn't allow us to accommodate that at the moment. We've got to find workarounds for these things. It could be that it's sublet, I suppose, at this point. I imagine that something like that would be relatively easy to do. So we'll have to get back to you on that, and on exactly what we can do and what the underwriting for the banks and so forth is going to allow us to do. This is the idea of building equity that we've been talking to some of the English housing folks who have been in Hackney, for instance, outside of London, who have these programs in place. So a percentage of your rent can go to ownership over time. And I think that they're great programs, but we have to find a way to do that, and we don't have that way yet. But if we did sublet, if you took the lease on the 3 bedroom and you lived there many years, if you had unfortunate circumstances or you were elderly and you wanted to move into that small apartment, it seems to me we could arrange it so you could sublet the larger apartment, or you could do it the other way, right, where you stay in the larger apartment. And so that was the intent, that we build flexibility into the structure.
I like that creativity. I really do. I like the idea of allowing people to be able to have some type of rental income within their unit. The question I had was who's going to be managing the business? Do you have already a company you're going to be working with? Is it going to be one of the developers? Do we have that entity figured out yet?
Joaquin, are you there? Do you want to address that?
I really didn't hear the question clearly.
He's asking about who would manage the property, who would manage the rental properties and all of it.
Currently, the plan is for Southern Development to manage the property. We have also been in potential conversations with other entities that do the leasing and then the consumer engagement. But and that will be, again, going back to Jim's point of the structure around the financing. Our intent is to manage it ourselves, and if we have to partner, we will. But in terms of managing the facilities and the grounds, that will be all managed by Southern Development.
Thank you.
I touched on this at our last meeting, but I mean, the idea of the triple net zero and your goals here truly are astounding. And it would be really helpful for me to have some more information about some of these goals that you have where they've been used elsewhere successfully, and to read a little bit more about it, because it's almost, it's so astounding what you're trying to do here that it's almost hard to believe that it's going to happen. So it would be, from my perspective, it would be helpful to read a little bit about some of these, where these ideas have been used elsewhere successfully. Have there been other complexes where they've done a couple of, these things?
Kathy, there's a database of net zero buildings in the United States that we can provide for you.
Okay, that would be helpful, because this is just truly amazing what you're trying to do here.
There aren't many net zero buildings, and we've done small net zero buildings, and this will be the most substantial net zero building built in the States.
Yeah, so we don't even know, in a lot of ways, we don't know what to ask, what problems might arise with some of these things that you're trying to do. So that would be helpful if you provide some of that information.
Well, we can do that. I mean, the technologies for the net zero energy are well known at this point, and they're not really too complex. I mean, all the pieces are off the shelf. They're things that you can buy.
Mm-hmm.
What's tricky is to make sure that you've modeled it so that you know what energy demands it has, and you've done it accurately enough so that when you finally, operate the building, it truly is net zero. Now, we're required to do that by the ILFI folks. We have to demonstrate that it actually works to obtain that certification.
By the who?
The ILFI, the Living Building Institute, which Kelsey mentioned. They are. They're probably the most progressive, certifying agency for sustainable buildings at this moment.
Okay, thank you.
Some of the other technologies like the water systems, these are also well-known technologies, and there's a couple of white papers out on why it's necessary, why it's important to use it. But I think you've already seen why it's important. I mean, we can't seem to scale properly to keep from having raw sewage outflows into our rivers and so forth. So this basically, this idea of distributing water treatment in smaller clusters throughout a city allows us to scale up and down based on what we need, as opposed to relying on.
And how was the reception from the water department about this project?
Kelsey, you want to talk about that? I think you are closest to that, unless Ed's here.
Yeah, their perception was really great. I mean, obviously, we all know that the combined sewer has significant issues, and there are mandates as part of the long-term control plan to try to mitigate that. And so, I mean, I think every project that we work on in the city, the water department is more than happy to partner with an entity that's willing to put in offsite improvements. So, I mean, that I think is huge. And the South End, this area specifically, has significant opportunity to create and mitigate the problems.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So if you want to take a look on the website of a company called Biohabitats. Now, these are the folks that we're working with in terms of the design of the water purification system. Biohabitats is an outgrowth of the work of a guy named John Todd, who invented the living building. But basically, we used to basically filter using sand and gravel for most sewage systems. He introduced the idea of using remediating plants and constructed wetlands to do that kind of work. And he actually has made, buildings where that is sort of part of the mechanism of the building. But take a look at their work. They're very good at it, and you can see a couple projects that they've done using these techniques.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I just got a fast one for Joyce Love, who couldn't make it tonight. How much is the total cost of this project? I don't know, like a rough estimate.
100 million is what we keep kind of throwing around, and I think that
it's more than that.
Yeah.
It is meant to use PACE financing to deal with the sustainability features. We have a consultant that is extraordinary consultant called Go Energy Link, who is filing the PACE paperwork.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other hands. What next? JR?
I think we're good. I think, Kelsey, if you can follow up with me on the stormwater management. I think that was one of the questions I had last, and I know you were still talking with the water department. If we could follow up with that one, because I think the stormwater management is something that was caught my eye, especially in the report, talking about how you're going to be mitigating not only the stormwater within the area, but also within the South End as a whole. So I think that's something we would like to see more information on.
Absolutely.
And
I think that's basically it for now, Kathy.
okay, and then we'll be putting together a list of questions, I guess. Is that
Yes.
the next plan? Okay.
And I just want to make sure that that you saw the renderings that were kind of on while we were asking other questions that showed the smaller building on the site.
I did not.
Did you catch those?
Right, can you put them back up again?
Sorry, you pulled them up and then we stopped sharing screens, and I just want to make sure that that the board had an opportunity to see this. And so, here's what the smaller building would look like along 2nd Avenue.
That is a 100-foot wide parcel, and this building is 80 feet wide. And it has a 6-story base on 2nd Avenue.
I'm confused by that. How many apartments across would it be? It doesn't, the building on the picture on the right doesn't look like the picture on the left in terms of the number of apartments.
I'm not sure. That's the basic appearance of the building, which doesn't really change. And I don't know if the image on the right, well, it may be the same, because the camera tends to stretch things depending on how you adjust the lens. But I can tell you.
So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 or 6 apartments going across 100.
Well,
it's 100 feet lot. Is that
no,
it?
those are not. Each one of those is not an apartment. Each one of those is a room. Each one of those bays. So we're showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it looks like there's 7 rooms there, and they're 12 feet. So that could be the whole building, nearly the whole building we're looking at.
So, okay.
So
Well, I guess
those,
I wanted to see it in the context of with those 2 houses existing. But
and that's shown on the building on the left. See the 2 houses there in white?
Right, but
Thank
I
you
think,
for
I think
highlighting.
Kathy would like to see it rendered. She'd like to see what it actually. what the
Yeah, so
relationship
that's the
actually
only
is.
one I could find this quickly. I think we probably have some other studies of the front elevation on Second Ave, and we can send those if.
How many
maybe,
apartments are you projecting in this redesigned apartment building?
Well, I'll tell you approximately. Just give me a second.
We haven't spent as much time studying that because it's not the one we want. It might be the one we build, but it's
Somewhere between 25 and 30 apartments.
So, I'm a little confused. It's not the one that you want, but we're looking at getting potentially a planning board decision by the end of the month. By the end of the month, are you going to have resolved whether those individuals are selling or?
No, we definitely won't. So all of Second Avenue, the building on Second Avenue is phase 2 of what we are, what we're proposing. And you'll see here on this, drawing in front of you, phase 2 in the center is not our preferred plan, but that's what we're going to build if the 2 property owners do not want to sell. On the right-hand side is, again, still phase 2, and that's what we're hoping to build. And it all depends on whether they sell or not. Before you is the zoning amendment application. And so the zoning amendment application is to amend the zoning for that entire block with the exception of the church property. And so amending the zoning for those 2 houses doesn't change their use at all. They're single-family houses. They will continue to be single-family houses. If they want, it actually will have a slight enhanced value to the property owners of the rezoning because there's slightly more flexibility in the zone we're proposing than the zone that it currently is, but they don't have to change a thing. They can sell their house to another person for a single-family use, or they could sell it to a developer at a future point and they could put one of the uses that's allowed in the new zone there. So their assessment won't change. I think JR looked into whether assessments will result as a result of the rezoning and was told that that would not occur. And so a slight benefit, but they can keep their identical use. Where we need to kind of, where the rubber meets the road on this is when we go to development plan review. So remember, we've got a bunch of different phases here. We've got to do rezoning first. Second, we do the district plan. Third is development plan. And development plan, other people know as kind of site plan. Other communities call it site plan. And development plan is really, what are you building? And so at that point, and this is phase 2. So the other 3 buildings are going to probably be up before we're going through phase 2 review. And at that point, we'll make a determination. And, you know, perhaps in the year or 2 that construction's taking place, they decide to sell or they decide to stay. And based upon those decisions, it will determine what we build in phase 2.
And just in terms for the committee to understand, in terms of our part on this with the rezoning, for seeker purposes, we still have to consider the entire building being on the entire plot. Even if the others do not sell, the requirements for seekers, because the rezoning is the entirety of it, we still have to look at the entirety.
And so we're trying to show the biggest impact, but it may be a smaller impact. But you guys want to look and evaluate what's the largest impact we have, and the largest impact we have is the building shown on the right.
Thank you. Kathy?
Yes.
So with regard to next steps on this, one of the things I just want to note is that our USDO says that when we make a decision, we're supposed to clearly state the factors considered in making a decision, as well as the basis or the rationale for the decision. That's for any changes or anything that we're acting on in the USDO. The for a zoning text amendment and zoning map amendments, there's also very clearly spelled out criteria. When I would like us to, in terms of process and efficiency, I'm wondering how much of that JR should be working on for us, so that before the next time we meet, we need to have that before us before we actually vote on this.
Right.
So,
Yep.
so since
So in terms of process, the next steps are we still have to wait for the planning board's recommendation first before we move forward. And in terms of what I've been doing internally for research on this is I've been taking the planning, the environmental assessment form from the developers, along with what planning department has provided and also what the planning board will soon be provided. And then we'll be providing to the council as a whole, my assessment from the investigation, with taking all the criteria as required by the state law and the USDO as to whether this should be receive a declaration of a negative declaration or a positive declaration. So what you'll be seeing in the next coming agenda in August will be a kind of a blanket resolution that will have like gaps in it for us to look at for what determinations to be made following all the criteria.
okay, so, but before, in terms of the next agenda, you're talking about the next agenda for the planning committee. So we're going to get your evaluation, I want to say well before that?
Yes.
Okay. And I assume that there will be some benefit from you having the decision from the planning board before you finalize any of your recommendations or your analysis?
Yes, because this project it's working in tandem as it is. So I've been following along with what the planning board has been doing as well as with Amy and Brad with this project. So been very involved with this and getting it forward to, get it to our passage hopefully by September or before that, but yes.
Okay, so really truly appreciate your being right in there working on both the seeker issue and what we need to do for this zoning text amendment. Kathy, the reason why I'm raising that is because I'm a little bit concerned that when we're talking about having a planning board decision, I don't want to then follow up with, the following week we're going to have a planning committee meeting, because there is a little bit of this process in our ability to review what JR is doing in his analysis. So, my preference would probably be, to not look to having another meeting until we have those documents.
Oh, sure.
And then preferably, maybe, a week to 10 days on that, and to make sure, maybe we'll be in a position that we can act. But I want to have very clear justification. I feel like the ordinance that we have before us, I'm not sure how we deal with that requirement that we set out the reasons for it. I think that can be done in a supporting memorandum. I'm not sure. It might be helpful to talk to Richard about what Richard and Ginny and Kelly about what their thoughts are.
We're working on the stylistics of it, making sure that it's all presented in a uniform way as that we've done in the past with these things. So,
and it would be helpful, JR, if you could, put this information in writing, what the process is.
Yes.
Send it out to everyone. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
In addition to a timeline as well with this. Because this is something we haven't done before.
Yeah, I do want to bring attention though. We will probably be having a meeting on other ordinances that have been coming forward. We're just waiting for a county planning board referral from them. So those are other things coming forward too, but that's another thing. So
connected with this project, you're saying?
No, they're separate.
Oh, all right. Well,
because with all these projects, they all require public hearings.
So we'll be busy is what you're saying.
Yeah, we will be busy.
All right. Okay. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was wondering, would there be any way we could do a road trip, or I'd just love to walk the site and see what's there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such a benefit to have the group together at the site. There's nothing like visiting the site, and we're happy to host that at a time that's convenient for you, or times if we need to. But it's helpful to walk the site. We can just mask up, and
Yeah, like that.
our team has done that a couple of times, so we're happy to show it to you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We'll wait to hear from you on that. And so I want to apologize again for how late this evening went, and also for not introducing you all at the beginning of the meeting. I apologize.
No worries. No worries.
So thank you very much. And I think we're all set for tonight. Any other last comment before we adjourn?
No, we appreciate your time, and you know, we know this is a big project, and we really appreciate the efforts that you are taking to thoroughly review it, because that benefits us as well as it benefits you. You know, we hope to provide you with any information, additional information that you need, and to the extent you think of it late tonight or tomorrow morning, just send us an email and we'll get that info to you.
If members have questions, feel free to send it. I just send it right off to Stephanie and Kelsey, and they're quick to respond.
Hey,
right.
I did want to add before we jumped off, Mrs. Jakeem, you know, since this project has kind of went public with the Albany Business Review, I just do want to share that there has been a lot of great feedback from a lot of people across this area. I've been meeting with bankers. I've been meeting with other lawyers, other business, you know, people in the region, and they all start with one, how excited they are to see investment in the South End. Two, how they believe the future of the city of Albany is bright. And three, they all believe that this is very needed, and they're looking and willing to do things that historically they have never done themselves, and they're charging their institutions to make strides in making these kind of investments towards neighborhoods throughout the region, and have introduced me into other conversations in other cities, you know, in the region. And I say all that to say that this is building a lot of excitement. You know, people are getting calls from people all over talking about this project, let alone the excitement that we've built with NYSERDA and different entities throughout the state. So I just wanted to end on a happy note. We all can be angry about something nowadays, but you know, people are getting excited. You know, we're working really hard as a team. You know, again, this, you know, I tell people all the time, first of all, these calls are very expensive. The people that are talking to you have to get paid, and you know, they're not cheap. Stephanie is not an easy cheap, so the smile comes with a cost. But the reality is, you know, we are putting a lot into this. There's a lot of excitement, and I just know with the trust of the city and the leaders of the city, you know, we can make this happen and really transition not just this neighborhood, but the city into a new direction. So I just want to end on that, and I'm probably going to do that every meeting just to let you all know how incredible this project is. But you know, it's very serious, and you know, thank you for the opportunity again.
All right, thank you so much, Jackie. We're all extremely excited about this, and we want it to happen, and we'll do our best to support you on this. So thank you, everyone. And motion to adjourn. Judy.
Yeah, so I just want to note that Jakeem was talking about the expense of bringing in the consultants. And when we talk about a walking tour and things like that, so that can be nice and that can be helpful. But I am concerned about not, you know, being efficient and not running up the tab on, you know, for the consultants, you know, for this project, and for us just to be very clear about what's needed for our vote and our review of it, and what may be nice, but you know, if you were paying the cost of, you know, nice dinner out for it out of your own pocket, how might you feel, you know, about it? So I don't want, you know, I see smiles from the consultants.
Well,
Oh,
I'm,
John, he's talking about maybe not spending so much money on us, but.
yeah,
yeah.
no worries. And I'm at least happy to attend and waive my fee for the walkthrough because I just think it is very important for you to go and experience the site.
The architects don't get paid by the hour, folks. So, just
Don't feel bad. Neither do we.
I understand. I understand that.
Okay, well, thank you
All right.
very much, everyone.
Motion to adjourn.
So what I was just gonna say is, feel free to reach out. I have no problem giving a tour. I can show you all my scab marks.
All right.
And
Thank you.
we can get Jim a milkshake and he'll be fine if he comes up.
All right. Thanks very much.
Good night,
We'll say good night.
Good night.
Thank
Have
you
a
to
good night,
staff.
everybody.
Thanks, staff.